After awards month, it is time for a return to the divisional format of the Locked On NHL Power Rankings.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of the Locked On NHL Power Rankings. I am Nick Zararis, joined by my co-host Hunter Hodes. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So on today's episode of the Power Rankings, we are going to bounce around. We've got a few nice topics in store. We are starting with a return to the divisional format. So we'll cover the four divisions in the league, the movement we've had in about a month since the last time we did the divisional alignment. In the second segment, we are going to touch on what's going on in the trade market, what teams are kind of in competition with each other for what players. And after seeing the Avalanche in person on Monday against the Rangers, we're going to talk a little bit about what teams are best optimized for the 3-on-3 overtime format in the regular season. So, Hunter, as you would expect on a power ranking show, I'm going to start the show by pulling up our power rankings for the week. And, Boston's back up to first place. The Leafs move up to third. Tampa moves down a spot. Pittsburgh is up a couple spots. Colorado is back in first in the Central. Last time we had done this, Winnipeg was in first. Vegas is down to third. Edmonton up to second. So we're getting closer to kind of what we thought preseason, the schedule, the rankings and the standings would look like. But we're probably the most off, I would say, in the Metro.
I would agree with that. I mean, the Flyers are still number 3 in the Metro. They were really struggling heading into the break. They had lost 4 or 5 in a row. And then they come out of the break. They beat the Florida Panthers, who've been one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference this year. Starting to find their mojo a little bit again. We'll see if that can continue in the unofficial second half of the season. And then, even behind them, you have the Penguins, who they've been inconsistent all year, but they've won a couple in a row at this point that are trying to make a move in the standings. They have a lot of games in hand on basically every team in the Metro. And if they're able to win those games, Nick, they should be able to get into the playoffs, I think. But again, games in hand only matter if you win them. You look at the Atlantic with the Leafs jumping up to number 3. I'm not fully sure. They deserve that. They've just been really inconsistent all season. I mean, you saw a few people last night calling for Sheldon Keefe to potentially be fired, but then of course they rally back to beat the Dallas Stars. It feels like, they have one good game, then they lay an egg. Then they have one good game and then they lay an egg. They're just not as consistent of a team as I thought they would be this season. Tampa Bay, I mean, they've been figuring out a little bit in the Atlantic, but they've won 8 of the last 10. They lost last night to the New York Rangers. In the West, I actually agree with most of those power rankings. The Oilers being at number 2 makes a lot of sense considering they just won 16 in a row. They were 1 away from tying the all-time record that the Penguins had with 17 back in 92-93. But the Vancouver Canucks continue to just be an absolute wagon this year. They've won 8 of their last 10 games. They deserve to be in that top spot in the Pacific. But when you look at these rankings as a whole right now, I mean, you really are starting to see the separation between the bona fide playoff teams, the bubble teams, and the sellers at the trade deadline, and that's coming up in only a few weeks. These standings are what we're probably going to see once the season ends in April and when the playoffs start. I don't think there's going to be too much more movement. Maybe you see a little bit in the Atlantic. The Metro, you could definitely see more than most, considering the Penguins might make a move in the standings. Maybe the Islanders make a move. The Devils could make a move. They're starting to get a bit healthy. They got to figure out their goaltending situation. But I think mainly for the Pacific and the Central, which teams are probably going to get into the playoffs. As you do the Atlantic, it's mainly just the Metro where, I mean, you really don't know which teams outside, I would say, of Carolina and the Rangers are going to get in. I'm still of the opinion that from the Eastern Conference, 5 playoff teams are going to be from the Atlantic and 3 from the Metro, which is going to make this division ultra tight until the end of the season.
When we had done this about, I want to say the week of Christmas, maybe the week before Christmas, we were talking how there were effectively maybe one spot in each conference available for these teams to be competing over. And it still feels like that's kind of the case, because when you look at the standings and you go by, when you look at the standings and you go with the wild card format, the Lightning and the Red Wings are at 59 and 58 points respectively, currently holding wild card spots in the Eastern Conference. The Islanders are 4 points back. The Penguins are 5. The Devils are 5. Even Washington's only 7. Even the Canadiens are only 8 back of that last spot in the East. But it feels like Tampa, and granted, they did lose Sergachev last night on a pretty ugly injury, which inclines you to believe that they more likely than not will have to get into the market for a defenseman if they want to hold serve to where they are, because they're just so depleted from years past. But it really does feel like there's maybe one spot up for grabs, and that's probably that second wild card in the East. And then when you go out west, the Kings and the Blues are currently in wild card spots with 56 and 54 points respectively. Nashville is tied with the Blues, but the Blues have a couple games in hand. The Kraken are 2 points back. The Flames are 3 points back. The Coyotes are 5 points back. The Wild are 5 points back. We are still very condensed here, and there's a decent chunk of time where all you got to do is, win 3 out of 4. That's not even a good run. You win 3 out of 4 and you're right back in the mix, which that doesn't sound like a lot, but for some of these teams, we can say that's probably not likely. And as some of these teams, as we get closer to the deadline, and more teams start to sell pieces, we'll start to see these herds thin out, because teams are going to have to be honest with themselves. But we've probably got another 2 weeks for those teams in that kind of the Wild, the Predators, the teams in that tier to decide whether or not they're going to push some chips in, if they're going to stand pat, or if they're going to sell off.
Yeah, it feels like the only team we've really seen sell so far, Nick, is the Flames, just
Calgary,
because I think they know that they're really not going to be in the race that much for the rest of the season, I would say. I mean, yeah, you look at the standings right now, they're 3 points back to a playoff spot, but based on those moves that they've made already, their thinking already is we're probably not going to be a playoff team this year. I mean, they're still going to play to win every game, but I think their thinking has been it's probably not our year, and we're going to maybe try to retool during the offseason. And that's what a lot of these teams are going to have to figure out over these next few weeks, just because these standings in both the East and the West are so condensed. And you brought up St. Louis. It's been remarkable seeing their turnaround this year. They're right in a playoff spot right now, even though coming into this year, I didn't think the Blues were any good. I didn't think they were going to be a playoff team. I thought they were going to have to sell off more assets at the deadline, and maybe they still do. Maybe they fall off a little bit, but they're in the race, and I did not expect that with about a couple months left in the season. The Kings have been really surprising because they came out of the gate red hot. They were one of the best teams in the league, and now Todd McClellan is fired, and they have an interim head coach. We'll have to see if they get that new coach bump the rest of the way, but they need to wake up because they have added quite a bit these last few years trying to get over the hump, because it feels like every time they make the playoffs, they play the Oilers, and they've had no answer for McDavid and Draisaitl and company, and they've been making moves to try to get them over the hump of that team and other teams in the West, and it's just not working out, especially the Dubois trade. He just has not been that good for LA this season. So both of these races, man, are going to be a lot of fun to watch down the stretch. I mean, again, you brought up the Islanders. You look at their record, man, I still can't help but laugh. 21 and 29 overall, but their 12 overtime losses have them 4 points out of a wild card spot, and then only a few points behind the Flyers for that third spot in the Metro. The East right now, again, in terms of spots that are available, it's mainly, one or two of those wild card spots, and then probably the third spot in the Metro, because we'll have to see if the Flyers are able to hold that down. And then in the West, it's mainly just the wild card spots, because that the top 3 in the Central are going to make it. That the top 3 in the Pacific are going to make it. But who is going to be the wild card teams? That's going to be really intriguing to see here down the stretch. So not too many spots open. So teams are going to have to really figure things out over these next few weeks heading into the deadline.
Yeah, absolutely. And the deadline is usually where we start talking about the runt of the litter dying off, where the guys who don't get to the bowl, if you don't get a piece, and that is a natural transition to what we're going to talk about coming up next. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. One of the things I love about Indeed is that it makes it so much easier to find people. The tests match people with skills requisite for your job listing, and it leverages over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day. Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use it, the better it gets. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claims as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risks, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subjected to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. And I want to thank everyone for hanging out with us today, listening to today's edition of the Locked On NHL Power Rankings. And Hunter, we are starting to see the options thin out. The game of trade deadline musical chairs, where we already got 2 of the 3-4 best centers off the market in Lindholm and Monahan. There are a couple of defensemen. There are a few forwards out there. There might be a goalie or two sitting around waiting to maybe be poached, but this feels like a very weak market, which lends itself to the seller side of things, because right now there's a real argument Boone Jenner or Adam Henrique are the best centers available at this deadline, and neither of those guys is going to slide into your top 6 if you're a good team. And
Nick,
make
are
a
we even
big
sure
impact.
that
Like,
the Blue Jackets are
if
going to trade Boone
you're
Jenner
in need of a third line center and you really need to just fine tune the bottom half of your lineup, sure,
he's been on that.
Both of those guys can do that.
Over,
but if you need anything more than that, it feels like there's really slim pickings out there.
And you saw in Friedman's blog on Wednesday, he said it would take a lot to get him back. So I think they're only going to do it if they get quite the package in return. I think he would help quite a few teams, but for teams that think he's a top 6 center, I think they're kind of fooling themselves a little bit. I think he's a really good third line center for a contender, in my opinion. For Adam Henrique, you know what you're going to get with Pat Verbeek. He's a very tough negotiator. That's been widely reported out there, and he's not going to settle for a return. He's going to get what he can in a trade and what he thinks is fair value, and he's going to wait to ensure that he gets it. So Henry could also help quite a bit of teams, but as you said, I don't think he's a top 6 center at that point. I think he's a really good third line center on a contender. But you know, the asking prices so far for centers, they've been high. I mean, even Sean Monahan, who, again, I don't think he's a 2C on a contender, but he still brought back a first round pick, which I'm not going to lie, I kind of laughed at that. I would not have done that if I were the Jets, but hey, Monahan's had a pretty good year. We'll have to see how the fit is in Winnipeg. That's just a really high price for someone who I think is also a pretty good third line center for a contender. You have Lindholm, who got dealt to Vancouver. that was a pretty nice package for the Flames because, they're going to be retooling. But, for the Canucks, they kind of just gave up, I feel like, a bunch of magic beans from Jack's Beanstalk beans and that. And, when you have those types of packages, it's a lot of futures. So with these centers, could Henrique get a first and more? Could Boone Jenner? I mean, he would definitely get a first plus more considering what the Blue Jackets will ask for him. But we're going to have to see what other centers are made available for the deadline. There were rumors, Nick, about Tyler Johnson with the Rangers, but it looks like he's banged up right now. So I don't really think that's going to be happening, at least for a little bit. There's also rumors that the Rangers also want 2 centers in general. So the center market, while it started to heat up, I feel like it might cool down because after a couple that we have mentioned and then the other 2 that have been dealt, there's just not that many centers I feel like that are truly going to hit the market. I feel like it's just going to be A, a lot of wingers, B, a few goalies, and C, a couple of pretty decent defensemen, especially Jacob Chikrin if the Ottawa Senators want to move on from him. Or Jake Gensel if the Penguins do decide to sell, but in my opinion, I don't think they will. No, they won't.
Yeah, that is probably the best player overall who may or may not be available at this deadline is Jacob Chikrin. I was talking about that the other day with somebody, and I don't think the Penguins are going to do that though.
No.
I think the Penguins, if anything, and this will probably frustrate people, I think they'll ride it out. I don't think they care whether or not they're going to keep him after this year because, okay, you trade him for some futures. Futures are not going to help a team whose core players are all in their mid to late 30s. They need guys who can come in and make an impact right away. Whether or not you should be buying at all, that's a different conversation. But from a perspective of, well, you should get something for Gensel, why? You're better off trying to roll the dice that whatever's been holding their first power play in particular back, that's keeping them from getting over this hump, you have a better chance of that happening than whatever you get for Gensel making a positive impact this year or next year. So Gensel, Chikrin, those are probably your 2 best individual talents who may or may not be available right now. Of guys we know are available, I would probably say it's Noah Hanifin, and even that I don't have a particularly strong conviction on. Like, I think Hanifin is probably a 3rd defenseman on a good team. He can play on your first pair, but if he's your first pair lefty, you're probably on the weaker end. He's had a pretty solid career in Calgary after getting dealt there for Dougie Hamilton way back in the day. But as far as this deadline, you got to think about it from the perspective of who's competing with who. We know that the Bruins were looking at Lindholm, and Lindholm isn't available anymore. We know that the Rangers, as you mentioned, are in the market for a center. We know that there just aren't a lot of good pieces available. Like, is any fan base really going to be satisfied if their team trades like a 3rd and a 5th round pick for 30-something-year-old Tyler Johnson, who hasn't played effective hockey, in 4 or 5 years? Sure, you can sell that to your owner and say, hey, we did something to improve the team. But in reality, your fan base is going to look at you like, why did you give up futures for a guy who just hasn't been good, frankly? Like, Tyler Johnson was a good hockey player at one point, but as soon as he signed that extension with Tampa Bay, he kind of regressed extremely hard. So as far as the other positions, I think Tanev is probably almost certainly going to get traded. Who's the best goalie even available? That's the other question, because there are a lot of goalie needy teams out there, and the names you would think that would be out there, like Jacob Markstrom, he has a full no move, and the Flames aren't really inclined to move him. He's having a solid season on a not great team. Are there any goalies in a tandem right now you really are just dying to have on your team? It's a very weak market at this deadline. And I would say Lindholm is probably the best player that's going to get moved unless Ottawa decides to move Chikrin, as you said. It's not great if you're a team that really needs to improve
talking
your
about
roster.
goalies, Nick.
But then again,
I feel like the best goalie that might be available
it's typically the team that
at this
adds
deadline is Marc-Andre Fleury. And I think probably going to pick where he wants to go, and I think he deserves that because this could be the final year that he plays in the NHL. Whether that's a team like Carolina, for example, I mean, that they scream Marc-Andre Fleury to me. Maybe that's a team like I don't know, Edmonton, if
Yeah.
Stuart Skinner needs a little bit of help out there, I could see those two teams being in on him. I do think there's a good chance that he gets moved just because he deserves to be on a playoff team for potentially the final year of his contract. I mean, another goalie that I could see maybe the Capitals selling high on, Charlie Lindgren. I mean, he's been very good this year. We talked about him a lot last week when we were doing our Vezina ballots, Nick. This year, he's hovered around, 916, 920, 925. I believe last week he was at 925. His save percentage has gone down a little bit just because he's had a couple of rough outings, but I don't think his value will ever be higher than it is right now. And the Capitals could be able to get a decent package back for him, especially if they don't think that they're going to be in the race. And you look at the Capitals' upcoming schedule, right? And their next 4 games are just ridiculous. Florida Panthers tonight in Florida. They then go to Boston to play the Bruins. They come home to play the Canucks, and then they're also still at home to play the Avalanche. You lose those 4 games, and there's a good chance they might. I think they were going to start selling at that point. And I think Charlie Lindgren as a goalie could bring back at least a decent haul. Another center that I did think of while you were talking, Nick Dowd from the Capitals as well. I think he could be a pretty intriguing piece for a team. I'm not saying he's going to get a first back, but I think maybe a second in a prospect, something like that for a center who can play on your third line, because he's always been a pretty solid depth piece for the Capitals. He's been really growing as a player overall. But you look at other players that could get moved. Scott Lawton of the Flyers. I mean, Jake Allen as a goalie as well, but he has not really been that good this season. He's kind of hovering around league average. If you want a 1B to backup goalie for a team, I think he would make sense. And, Kent Hughes, he's going to try to do right by that player. And I know he said that, I'll try to keep 3 goalies for the rest of the season. I know he probably doesn't want to do that. But I will say, don't underestimate Kent Hughes in terms of trades, because he's been cooking lately up in Montreal. And then, I mean, maybe if the Blues fall out of it, you can maybe have Pavel Buchnevich out there. I also could see maybe Vladimir Tarasenko if the Senators want to move him, because the Senators, we all know, are not going to make the playoffs this year. They have a couple of intriguing pieces where we discussed Chychrun, but I could see Tarasenko potentially getting moved from Ottawa as well. But you look at the deadline as a whole, and, outside of Hanifin, Chychrun, and maybe Gensel, but you said it, I don't think the Penguins are going to do it either, because I still think they're all in for this season, and their only way they do it is if they are way out of the playoff race over these next few weeks. But outside of these select few players that may be available, I mean, we all know Hanifin is, Chychrun might be, but outside of those two, again, maybe Gensel if the Penguins really stink these next few weeks, there's really not a star talent, I would say, available at this deadline compared to in recent years.
No, absolutely not. And we will be right back in a moment, and we are going to wrap up talking about some of the best 3-on-3 units in the NHL. I am tired of ticket apps being a pain. I am tired of surprise fees. I am tired of not knowing what my seat looks like, where I'm going to sit. I am tired of apps not telling me what numbers in the row my seat is. You shouldn't have to worry about buying tickets being a hassle. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I am a big proponent of waiting till the last minute to get anything done, both to my detriment and to my benefit. But the good thing about Game Time is the last-minute flash deals, where if the game is going to start within the hour, you are going to be able to find something awesome. I also am a big fan of the AR 3D rendering of what the view of the game looks like from your seat, so you can see if there is something obstructing the view and you want to sit somewhere else. Game Time has deals right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Want to thank everyone who's hanging out with us on this Thursday afternoon. Hunter, how are you feeling about 3-on-3 overtime as a concept at this point? We're pretty far into this as the standard of what the NHL is going to do with overtime. They really want to avoid games getting to a shootout. They really want to give people the satisfaction, especially the people who paid to be there, that they saw something exciting.
Right. I still like 3-on-3. I think it's a lot more exciting than 4-on-4 with what I was seeing as a child before they finally changed it. But they do need to make adjustments, I think, to 3-on-3. I actually do agree with the league where they're proposing to potentially ban players from exiting the zone to try and regroup, because you're seeing that a lot more. It's kind of a game of chicken. It's kind of a game of keep away. You're preventing the other team from changing. And I get it, because it obviously helps the team that has the puck. But it's just every time a player comes into the zone that doesn't like something, oh, boom, we got to retreat. I still think they got to do something to mitigate that, because it is kind of making 3-on-3 a little more boring than how it used to be when it first got introduced. And obviously teams prepare for it a little bit more now. They know some of the more of the strategies, but for that specifically, Nick, I think that needs to be changed a little bit to where you can't just retreat from the offensive zone every time you don't see something that you like.
I agree with you on one account of we want to keep this moving and we want there to actually be shots on goal. I know I've watched more than one overtime this year where it's been like 3 minutes before there was a real
Right.
serious scoring attempt because of the constant regroups and resets. I do think there is something to the idea that as the game gets faster and more skilled, that it's just going to continue to get closer and closer to that, where puck possession is going to always end up being what's most important in the overall game state. You'll see less of the dump and chase style, but in overtime specifically, I think the one component that I do like and why I'm not as staunchly about that, why I am not so staunchly in favor of a rule about retreating the zone is that it's really where you get to see creativity, where you get to see the best players on each team with a lot more space, putting pressure on each other. Like, for example, in the overtime of the Rangers against the Avalanche on Monday, where Jonathan Quick came out to the top of one of the circles to play a puck that was about to be recovered. He threw a very risky pass laterally that could have been intercepted. He hit, I want to say, Zibanejad, who tapped it to Lafreniere. And as Lafreniere is cutting inward, he also had the benefit of, I believe it was Eric Gustafsson, who was at the point starting to come down and working as a screen. It really, 3-on-3 allows the best players in the world to look like it. When there's that much extra space and they don't have to worry about these big lumbering dudes cross-checking them and giving them CTE, there's a lot more opportunity for creativity and excitement, which is ultimately what I'm watching hockey for. Like, I want to see the best players in the world with the puck on their stick make things happen, as opposed to dumping and chasing and winning puck battles. So there is give and take. I think the best anyone can do, and you and I talked about this earlier in the week, I don't think anybody can do anything better than Makar, McKinnon, and Rantanen, just because all three of those guys are probably 3 of the 5 to 10, I would say 3 of the 10 best players in the world, and they're all on one team. Like, the Oilers can get 2 of the 10 best players in the world. The Leafs can probably get 2 of the 10, but the thing that sets Colorado apart is the fact that Rantanen's elite at both offense and defense, and Cale Makar is, capable of scoring 30 goals as a defenseman, where there's just nobody else who can do that.
The one that really stacks up, I think, to that one, to me, McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard. I mean, I don't think you can even get the puck away from any of those 3 players, especially McDavid and Draisaitl. I mean, McDavid, we all know how much of a cheat code he is at 5-on-5, and especially on the power play, but he's also a massive cheat code in 3-on-3, because it is so hard to get the puck off his stick. The way that he can just burn you with how fast he is, how great of a release he has, how great of a passer, that he is. And then you combine with Draisaitl, his release, how great of a passer he is, and then how great of a puck mover Bouchard is. There's just not many that can compete with that. I think it's honestly a 1A, 1B with the Colorado and Edmonton one. You look at others, Vancouver's one is interesting with Pedersen and Hughes and Miller, but honestly, I would potentially substitute JT Miller for Brock Besser just because I think Besser has a better release than Miller. Don't get me wrong. I think Miller has been one heck of a player for the Canucks, especially over the last several seasons, but I think Besser on there can compete with the other two units that we just mentioned just because of how great of a shot he is and how, he's also a righty on that unit. You combine him with two lefties. That I think is also pretty intriguing to me. Other units that really pop out at me. I mean, you would think the Penguins would have a great 3-on-3 lineup, whether it's, potentially Malkin with Carlson and, someone like Riley Smith, or even for obviously Sidney Crosby, Jake Gensel, Chris Letang. But the Penguins have been such a horrible 3-on-3 team these last couple of years. It honestly just baffles me considering the amount of talent that they have on this team. You have others.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Too many cooks in the kitchen. It's really that. It really comes down to that with some of these units. And we're just about out of time for this week. So give us one more you really want to shout out and we can get out of here on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be the Toronto one. Marner and Riley. You can even substitute, Marner out for potentially Nylander if you want. You can put Tavares on there if you want as well. But any combination with the Leafs top players is absolutely deadly in 3-on-3. So that's the last one that I really want to shout out, because with Matthews' release, Marner, his playmaking ability, and then Riley with his puck moving ability. And again, you can even substitute Marner out there for Tavares, who is a great playmaker and has a good release. That is a cheat code as well, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure. You got to have the trigger man to make any of these type of specialty units work. And that will just about do it for this week's episode. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Hunter and I will see you guys next week. Until then, later.